Okay. If you have any questions, just enter them in the chat and I'll respond to them. I've got a couple of individuals that have yet to complete the enrollment verification quiz. I need that done as soon as possible. It doesn't matter if you pass it or not, you just need to do it. It's one of the things they look at as far as enrollment is concerned. We're now in week 2. We're covering chapter 2, Thinking Like an Economist. And then we have chapter 3, and we'll talk about that on Thursday. So the first thing I want to do is share my screen with you. You should be seeing the screen in front of you. There's a link to this class. I'm going to go to student view so we'll see exactly what you see in the class. The virtual office hours, I haven't got anything listed for SO6. However, if something comes up and you need to talk to me, just send me a text or an email and we can set up a private session between 2 people, 5 or 10, it doesn't matter. I want to remind you that in the course information, course documents, there are materials here, lecture info videos, lecture notes, PowerPoint files, all available to you in preparing for test 1 and for your homework. Very useful tools. It seems like I have a lot of issues where individuals are saying they don't know what is being graded. If you go through Blackboard in the week 2, you get supporting materials that should include your e-text, gradable assignments. You just click that tab, it shows you exactly what is gradable for this class. So chapter 2 and chapter 3 are gradable for week 2. Has anybody had any problems getting in there and taking any of these, taking test 1 or homework 1? Okay. If you did, just send me a no, a yes that you had trouble, and I will get with you individually and see if we can figure out what happened. Okay. So if we go into the weekly assignments, you see week 2, I gotta figure out why week 10 is showing, and 14 and 17. All of these materials that are listed for week 2, I've had some students ask the question, do they have to do them all? The answer is no. What I would advise you to do is read the chapter first. Once you get through reading the chapter, if there's anything you need clarification on or you're a little confused about a theory or a concept or a principle or a law, supply and demand, it doesn't matter. Make note of it, go back and go into these supporting materials, and there's quizzes, there's graphs, interactive graphs. There's a lot of stuff that's available to you to answer those questions. So I would advise you first read the chapter. If nothing else, read the summary of the chapter. And then go into the supporting materials. Is everyone okay with that? Type no if you're not, I'll deal with you individually, okay? Seems like Davis is speaking for everyone. That's good. So what I want to do now, I want to bring up weekly schedule real quickly. You can see that we're going to cover 1 through 6 for test 1. Once we get to week 4, I'm going to reopen all of the materials from test 1, chapter 1 to chapter 6, and they will remain open until 9/13. That way you have all the supplemental materials available to you when you prepare for this test. That means you can go back and do the quick quizzes, anything you want to do. Because I want you to have everything available to you. So let's talk a little bit about chapter 2. Okay, where are the PowerPoints? Thinking like an economist. If we're looking at economics as a science, it's not truly a pure science. It's not where we can do experiments in controlled environments and completely block out external variables to measure how X responds to Y and vice versa. As economists, we're taking just a snapshot of the economy at the moment we're doing the measurements. Tomorrow, everything will be completely changed, or it may change just a little or a lot. There's a lot of ways to interpret the responses. It's based on our ideals, our biases, or non-biases. So that's the reason you'll see where a lot of economists will disagree on some very simple, or what you consider logical, positions. In the chapter, they're going to talk about the 2 roles of the economist, the models, how economists use them, the circle flow of income diagram, a production possibility front. We'll look at that, and what difference between micro and macroeconomics, and positive and normative economics. These are terms that you will need to know as you go through the textbook, the difference between positive and normative, and through life, what is positive and what is normative. Really, like if you're looking at a news station, are they objective or subjective? That'll affect how you respond. So just keep that in mind. And as economists, you need to always think about that. So as scientists, we try to explain the world. If there's a drought in China, we try to explain what's going to happen in Taiwan or Japan, or how they respond to that drought. And then we play the role of policy advisors and try to improve the situation through policy and procedure, or try to advise them of the proper policy and procedure. As scientists, we should be dispassionate, developing and testing of theories and how the world works, and devise theories, collect data, and analyze these data to verify or refute theories. When you get into your research paper, that's what we're dealing with. It's a policy analysis paper. I want you to select a policy that is of interest to you, whether having it put into legislation or remove the laws or modify the laws, whatever. Especially with COVID-19, you look at all the executive orders and everything that have been signed. I want you to pick one and determine what is the impact going to be if they go through with it or if they do not go through with it. That's what a policy analysis does. That's what a policy advisor does. You look at a situation, you look at a policy, and you try to improve it. And you'll look at how to devise theories, collect data, and analyze, and try to support or refute your hypothesis or your thesis statement. So when we start looking at the the thesis and outline for your policy analysis paper, I want you to keep this in mind. I understand that economists, you have two economists looking at the same thing and see something totally different. I'm not going to grade your papers based on whether I agree or disagree with your conclusion or your supporting evidence. I'm going to look at how well you either supported or refuted your thesis or the policy, and you came to a logical conclusion. By looking at the data that you have, could you go from the thesis to a logical conclusion? That's all I'm looking for. Doesn't matter if I agree with it or not. It's one of the best papers I've had in the past. I didn't agree with what they said, but it didn't matter. They did a good job. We make assumptions. There's nothing absolute. Let me give you an example. Let's say that in looking at statistics, there's always a big problem with determining or linking causation to correlation. You can have things that correlate together, that fit, or they work at the same time, the majority of the time. But that does not determine causation. Let's say you have a car that you're following and they turn on the right turn signal and make a right turn. So you decide you want to study people's habits of turning on their turn signals and what decision they make. If you follow enough cars, you'll find a majority of them, when they turn on the right turn signal, they will turn to the right. You'll have some that will go straight. You'll also have some that will go left. So if we put that on a scatter diagram with the right turn signal on one axis and the right turn on the other axis, it's going to be a positive relationship between the right turn signal and the turn. So we can look at a coefficient or a correlation between the two, which is going to be very strong, because you measure it from -1 to a strong negative fit to a +1 to a strong positive. We can show the correlation, and there's a strong correlation between the turn signal and the turn. But what we have to remember is that turn signal did not make that car turn right. So there's no causation determined. You can't determine causation in statistics. You can determine relationships. So anytime someone comes to me and they tell me that they know that X caused Y through statistics, I have a big problem, because they don't understand the foundation of correlation and coefficients. So just keep that in mind. Now, we use models as economists to take real complex things and make them appear so simple. There are micro textbooks that I could give for this class that probably the majority of you would fail if you didn't have calculus. But we would not accomplish anything. I would rather use the textbook that we have. It takes a very complex topic or policy or theory or concept and simplifies it to where there's understanding. And most of the studies you're looking at, when you look at the field of economics, it goes back to Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations. And there were a few others in Europe at the same time, not as famous, but were doing the same thing and coming up with the same responses. In this chapter, we're going to look at the circular flow of income. There are two decision makers in this circle. There's actually three, but one's in the middle. That'd be government. But you have firms and households, and they interact in two markets: markets for inputs to build the products, which will be going from the households to the firms, and the outputs, which are goods from the firm, will be going back to the households. So there's two intersecting markets or interacting markets. The households earn the factors of production: land, labor, and capital. The firms acquire that through rent, wages, interest. So they have to buy those goods, acquire those factors of production to produce anything. A household can exist without a firm. History can show us that over a period of 10,000, 20,000 years. There were no Walmarts or CVS's or hospitals, but they survived. It was a tough existence, but they survived. We can see it in third world countries today. It's the same thing. They don't have all the factors of production. They don't have the resources, but they still survive. But the life expectancy and standard of living are definitely reduced. Now, the market for goods and services are bought and sold. The sellers are the firms and the buyers are the households. The inputs are bought and sold. The market factors of production, the sellers buy it from the households, and the buyers are the firms. So you can see the circular flow diagram here. The households spend the money for goods and services. It goes to the firms. In exchange, the firms will pay wages, rent, and profit, and it's income to the households. And going the opposite direction, the goods and services are sold from the firms. They're bought by the households. They provide land, labor, and capital to the firms, and the factors of production are delivered to the firms. Firms cannot exist without households, but households can exist without firms. Because without households, the firms would have no factors of production, and they'd have no one to sell their product to. The production possibility frontier. Let's see if I can pull up some of my old notes. Here I bring in circular flow. There were some notes that were taken by a student about 20 years ago. This hasn't changed. There's been some variation in factors of production. Different economists look at it a different way. But the production possibility curve looks something like this. It's a downward sloping. It goes from the X to Y axis. It's nonlinear. And if we produce inside this curve, we are not technically efficient. If we produce on the curve, let's see if I got just a single curve. No, none of this set. Reset it. Should okay. This is a little better. Here we can see the curve. We have product A, product B. It could be any products. It could be, we're comparing plastic forks to Lamborghini sports cars. When we as a nation are producing goods, we're utilizing all available factors of production. And we're saying that if you produce this quantity of A, or plastic forks, you're going to produce 0 units of Lamborghinis. That means all the people that are making Lamborghinis can go here and start making plastic Fords, or they're not going to work at all. Over here, we can produce B, or the Lamborghinis, at this level without any production of plastic Fords. But we can produce at any level on or along this curve and be technically efficient. Anything inside this curve, we may be economically efficient, but in this production possibility frontier, it means we have production capacity remaining. So with the production possibility curve, I don't want to close that tab, I'll just minimize it. We can see here that it actually moves, or can move, in and out. You can see in this case with forks and spoons, and let's assume that they're both made of steel or plastic, and the price of the plastic or the steel goes down, and there's more available. They found another source. The production could go up as long as the limiting factor of production was the plastic or the steel. And this one, it shows pins and fertilizer, no relationship. Come up with a new technology, increase corn yield by 20%. We'll see an increase in the production possibility curve, but no change in the pins. And this one is from a famous speech by an infamous individual named Adolf Hitler. And he made the comment to his nation that they had to get better at making guns, not butter. And this is prior to World War II, even beginning. So he was telling everybody, we have to get ready for war. He was planning for war. So as soon as the war stopped, the production of butter, which was considered a luxury, was reduced. The individuals that are making butter are now making guns. So we see a transition from one commodity to the next. Now, as we look at an economic system, we produce more than two items. But what we're seeing with this is what you give up. If you produce the guns, you're going to give up X amount of butter. If you produce more butter, you can give up an increased amount of guns with a nonlinear curve that's bowing out. So that's the law of increasing marginal opportunity cost. We'll see along the way. Now in this case, they're doing a little example. Produces only two goods, airplanes and soybeans, no relationship. They have a fixed amount of labor, fixed amount of quantity of technology, and available resources. Technology can be used to produce. If they do only soybeans, 5,000 tons, only airplanes, 100 airplanes, or a combination of soybeans and airplanes. If we do just soybeans, you can see if we set up points A, B, C, and D, going from left to right on the curve along the x-axis, as one of these goes up, the other is going down, and it's not at a constant rate. It's just a nonlinear curve. Now here they show it linear, I think for simplification purposes only. But from experience, I can tell you the individuals that produce the airplanes are not specialized at producing soybeans, and vice versa. The farmers producing soybeans are not taking the weekend off and building airplanes. This will be a nonlinear curve because they're non-related. But what they want you to see is what you give up. For the first 1,000 tons of soybeans, they give up 20 units, 20 airplanes. For the next 1,500, they give up 30 airplanes. For the next 1,500, they give up 30 airplanes. And for the last 1,000, they give up 20 airplanes. So as we move from left to right, we see the cost of switching from one commodity to the next. Anything in here is considered inefficient. Anything outside of this, like it says, it's not feasible. But we can produce at any point along this curve. In this case, it's one of those possible for the economy to produce the following combination of two goods: airplanes, 80 and 4,000 tons of soybeans. 80 airplanes and 4,000 tons of soybeans is going to be right about here. That's not happening. We do not have the factors production to produce that level. Can we produce 30 airplanes and 2,500 tons of soybeans? 30 will be somewhere in here, and 2,500 is here. Yes, but we will have factors of production remaining. It'll be an inefficient level, but we can still produce it if that's what the consumer wants. In your homework, just be careful. Make sure that if they ask you if you can produce at X level or Y level, you actually go back to the graph and you find those points, the 30 and 2,500. Even if 30 was halfway, you're still fine because you can produce actually 50 airplanes with 25 tons, 2,500 tons of soybeans. Here, they explain what we were just looking at. We can do this at G, but we're not efficient. We cannot attain this. It's not possible. The PPF is the abbreviation for production possibility frontier. Production possibility frontier is everything inside this curve. We could produce 0, 0, or 1 and 1. We wouldn't be efficient, but we can do it. That's the production possibility frontier. Anything outside of this is unattainable. Now we can move along the PPF, we can shift resources, manpower, etc. But if we go back to not that one, the other one. With the guns and butter. As we shift, this is a nonlinear curve, but as the individuals stop making butter and it moves inward, we'll see the number of guns increase, but at a slower rate. And it's because there are people making guns that should be making butter. They're not good at the metallurgy or the technical parts of building a weapon. They're better at making butter. And vice versa. We start producing guns and send those individuals to produce butter, it's going to be inefficient as well. Because there's two totally different skills. In this situation, it says the society faces trade-offs, so that's opportunity cost. We can determine for, we give up 1,000 tons of soybeans for one airplane. For the first airplane, but we give up 10,000 tons for the second airplane. Now, if we're the same company and we make, say, ballpoint pens and we can produce red pens or blue pens, we're going to have a linear curve because we're going to be limited by our production capacity. Let's say we can make 1,000 a day. If we make 1,000 blues, we can't make any reds. We make 1,000 reds, we can't make any blues. Now we could produce 500 and 500, or 250 and 750, etc., and still be technically efficient. In this case, they show us the opportunity cost. In this case, we can rise overrun, produce the first 1,000 tons of soybeans, they give up 20 airplanes. So one airplane costs what? We get 20,000 divided by 20, so it'd be 50 tons. And then we can do it in reverse for the soybeans. Here we see a growth shift in the PPF. It can move outward. They don't have to move together. They can be separate. They can both move inward together. For example, look at what's happened to the gym memberships since COVID-19. All of them are down. And we could be comparing gym memberships and movie tickets. We see both of them decline severely. The shape of the PPF, if it's straight, and that's what I have a little issue with here, it says that it's an equal offset. But normally when I do graphs, whatever I start with on my x-axis or y-axis, I would have 20, same distance I'd have 40, then 60, then 80, and then 100. These are not set up the way I would set them up, because by just setting the production numbers here, just in the order from the smallest to largest, you don't see the true condition of this curve. Because it shouldn't be a straight line, because this says constant opportunity cost. The way I have it set up, it's 50 tons of soybeans for an airplane. What we see is, in most cases, unless it's the same company producing both goods, we see increasing opportunity costs. As you produce one of additional products of A, you give up more quantities of B as you continue to increase. That is the law of increasing marginal opportunity costs. Here we see beer and mountain bikes. For when we start out here, if we want to create the first mountain bikes, we give up very little beer for the first 100 bikes. But if we come down here, we give up a tremendous amount of beer for the last few bikes. That shows you the specialization between the two. Now, if we wanted to determine the opportunity cost at A, the opportunity cost for mountain bikes is low. We give up very few mountain bikes for more beer. But on the bottom end, the opportunity cost for bikes is very high, because they give up a lot of production for beer. The curve is outward when you have different workers having different skills. There's different opportunity costs. There's one over the other. There's some resources and mixed resources with varying opportunity costs. Going back to the airplanes and soybeans. That's the reason I don't think that should be represented as a linear curve. Because if you look at the conditions here. Different workers have different skills. All that applies to a bowed curve for airplanes and soybeans. I just think they use those as to simplify, make it more easily understood. But in real life, that would have been a bowed curve. Now, when we look at the field of economics and we're thinking like economists, what we're trying to do is evaluate the value of a product, either our utility, our satisfaction of consuming the product, or a price being determined by quantity. In microeconomics, we study how household and firms make those decisions and how they interact in the markets for inputs and outputs. That's microeconomics. Now, the macro, we study the economy phenomena, including inflation, unemployment, and economic growth. There's so many things going on in the economy now. There's tons of materials out there to write macroeconomic papers on. But we can see the same thing with microeconomics. If you see the hair salons, they're shut down. We have individuals that have not worked since March. And there has to be some incentive to get them back into the workforce. That's the type of thing that is a little bit of both micro and macro, because the government needs to step in some cases, to fix these problems. If they just took a laissez-faire approach, it would fix itself, but over a longer period of time. As a policy advisor, we can look at two types of statements. We can have positive statements that describe the world as it is, and we can confirm or refute by examining evidence like minimum wage laws, rent controls, and those type things. We can make positive statements. Normative statements is trying to describe how the world would be if we did X or Y. And the term they use here is the government should raise the minimum wage. That's a normative statement. It's not a positive statement. It's not descriptive. Now, if we said if the government raises minimum wage, we'll have increase in the number of unemployed, unskilled workers. And the majority of those, if we go to the Bureau of Statistics, is going to be single females that are head of household with children. So they're going to be impacted at a greater rate. And if you put all that together into a statement, that's a positive statement. Because you can say that there will be jobs lost to artificial intelligence due to the increased minimum wage, and the people who are going to suffer the greatest are the ones that are unskilled. Therefore, X could lead to Y. So we have to know the difference between positive and normative statements. Here are some examples: positive, normative. Prices rise as the government increases the quantity of money. Government should print less money. A is positive. B is normative.
Can you go back one slide for just a minute?
C, a tax is needed to stimulate the economy. I would look at that probably more on the normative side. An increase in the price of burritos will cause the increase in consumer demand. That's positive. It determines the relationship. How the relationship between burritos and movie streaming interact, I don't know. But it doesn't have to be true. It just describes a relationship, and that's a positive statement. You see, the tax cut is needed. That's a value, that's a normative statement. It's opinion. Government should print less money. That's normative. It's a value judgment. It cannot be confirmed or refuted. But if we say if they do print more money, prices will rise, then we can go to quantity theory of money and other tools to validate that statement. If you're looking at economists and are being employed as an economist, there's the Council of Economic Advisors. It's a group of economists. The Office of Management and Budget, they help formulate spending plans and regulatory policies. And the Department of Treasury designs tax policy to some degree. The Department of Treasury gets they get the budget from the House, Senate, and the President. Then they determine how to make the payments. If the budget exceeds the revenue, they'll send out IOUs. So they're not necessarily designing the system, but they're making the system function with X amount of capital. Department of Labor analyzes data on workers, knows looking for work, comes up with policies. The economists at the Department of Justice, looking at antitrust laws, Congressional Budget Office, they help Congress, Federal Reserve, they set monetary policy. The president has economists, communication advisors, press advisors, legislative advisors, and political advisors. Then the president makes a decision. So all along the way in this decision process, we see economists involved. Later on in this chapter, just in a few moments, we're going to look at some things that the economists agree on. They can disagree on the validity of an alternative policy, the different values, the different normative views about what policy should try to accomplish. Today starts the DNC convention, the Democratic convention. I guarantee you, if you take their pool of economists, they can find reasoning to validate anything they want to do. But on the other hand, the Republican National Committee conference is going to start next week and have another group of economists that do the same thing on that side. So there's a lot of personal biases or positions or just how you see things. Two people can look at something and see a totally different picture. It's not wrong. It's just how it works. It's not a pure science, as we talked before. Laws that limit the resale of tickets for entertainment and sports events make potential audience members of those events worse off than average. Economists say they agree. It'll drive the price of the tickets up. 12% is uncertain. And then 8% disagree. Here's some things they do agree on. And even though they do agree on them, it doesn't mean that the government's going to take their advice. The ceilings on rents reduces the quality and quantity of housing available. 93% of the economists agree on this. However, you go to New York City, California, there's Burbank, and some other cities that have rent control policies. They tell the landlord how much they can charge for rent from year to year. Even though all the economists say it's bad. And see, the problem is, the longer it's in effect, the harder it's going to be to eliminate those policies. Economists also agree that import and tariffs and import quotas reduce the general economic welfare of the U.S. system. But it's true, because if we limit external resources from coming in, we don't have as much competition for domestic producers, and the prices will go up. And we'll see that later on when we start looking at world pricing versus domestic pricing, and whether to import or export goods. The United States should not restrict employees from outsourcing work to foreign countries. 90% agree. They should eliminate subsidies for farms. They agree. Eliminate subsidies to professional sport franchise. The majority of economists agree. And we can go on and on. Large federal budget deficit has adverse effects on the economy. 83%. Should ban genetically modified crops. Minimum wage increases unemployment among young and unskilled workers. The large majority of economists agree on this, but we still have individuals saying that it doesn't hurt anyone. And you won't see that big a change in the unemployment rate. So that is basically true, but you got to look at the unemployment rate of certain groups. This is where you'll see the individuals really hurt by a minimum wage increase. Subsidies for ethanol should be reduced. They all agree. Here they have an example of a discussion. I want y'all to deal with that on your own. Let's go for the chapter in a nutshell. Economists are scientists. They're not pure scientists, but they are scientists. We use diagrams, graphs, laws, theories to make our points. And we're trying to make things that are very complex very simple. When I was in upper management in the airlines, I got reports every morning, statistical reports on failure rates and cycles and those type of things on all of our aircraft. They put a stack of papers about 4 inches thick with all the data there. That data was useless because I was not going to spend all my day going through reams of paper to find relationships. So I told them, very simply, put it in graphical format for each aircraft. That way I can see it. It simplifies it. I can go through it quickly. And if I see something that concerns me, then I can ask for the raw data. But just data by itself is not useful. You need to convert it into information. Economists, scientists use a circle flow diagram on the production possible frontier. We'll see supply and demand come in as well. We'll talk about the micro versus macro. Household and firms and interactions are micro. The economy as a whole is macro. We'll talk about positive normative statements. You'll see that in your homework. And as policy advisors, economists make normative statements. That's the reason we see such variation in judgments and ideas. Does anybody have any questions on the material in chapter 2? Let me stop the share. Or any questions about the material at all? The production possibility curves, anything. Anybody have issues on the
Are
assignment
the
guide
are the PowerPoints
or
online?
Blackboard and Cengage?